You're listening to Kingdom Thinking, a podcast series designed to start a conversation around the deeper intellectual questions surrounding life, faith, and meaning. Here are a collection of questions, ideas, and stories that I hope will challenge you to think about your own beliefs, and perhaps introduce you to new perspectives, regardless of where you are in your journey. I'm your host, Al Butcher, and I can't wait to share this episode with you. This episode is all about the Christian understanding of concepts of justice, forgiveness, and grace. What do we mean when we say God is just? And how can he be both just and forgiving at the same time? Yesterday evening, I was watching the trailer for the upcoming Justice League movie. A movie that I am honestly very excited for, but it's the ending of the trailer that I primarily want to talk about. As the trailer finished, the words "Justice for all" blared out across the screen, and I couldn't help feeling a little confused. It seemed as if the justice that the heroes of this movie were dispensing seemed to primarily consist of going around bashing people on the head. Now, while there's nothing wrong with this as a plot device, I couldn't help but feel that the tagline was a little misleading, and that there might be a little bit more to justice than is being shown there. Well, then what do we mean by justice? This week, I was reading in the news about an update to a story about an Indigenous boy named Elijah Doughty. In August of last year, Elijah Doughty, riding a motorcycle, was hit on a dirt track by a local landowner driving his car. The verdict was handed down this last week, such that the driver was found not guilty of manslaughter, but instead was found guilty of dangerous driving causing death, due to several complications involved in the case. Both at the time of the event and in response to the verdict, there has been significant backlash from the local Indigenous community about the sentencing process, even culminating in violent protest. Central to the backlash, particularly after the sentencing process, seems to be the complaint that this is a failure of justice. That justice hasn't been done either by the Indigenous community, by Elijah's family, or even by Elijah himself. We might actually be surprised to find that this idea of justice is contained in the Old Testament and is translated from the Hebrew word mishpat, occurring more than 200 times in its various forms. Its most basic meaning is to treat people equitably when it comes to a case, that the same wrong should ultimately carry the same penalty, and therefore that wrongdoers should be duly punished. But mishpat does go deeper than simple punishment of wrongdoing. Mishpat also refers to the need to give people their rights. In those pre-modern societies, orphans, widows, immigrants, and the poor had very little power and were the most vulnerable to oppression and crime. And in fact, mishpat justice is a call to defend their cause. Mishpat justice is a call to lift up those people. It's both a call to punish wrongdoers and to care for the victims of unjust treatment, especially those who are most vulnerable. It's this kind of justice that we appeal to when we hear of cases like the Elijah Doughty case. Leaving aside the actual result of the case and its legitimacy, the key point here is recognizing this universal desire for mishpat justice, for punishment of wrongdoing, and for comforting of victims. However, I think that there is another idea of justice that we have in our heads with a slightly different focus to mishpat justice. I'm talking about many of our ideas of social justice. Now, in our current society, we can make jokes about social justice warriors until the cows come home, but the idea of social justice has actually existed long before Tumblr has. You might be surprised to learn that. While mishpat does form an important part of social justice, there is something else there. In fact, the ultimate goal of social justice is actually to create a kind of society where mishpat justice never has to occur, where there are no wrongdoers to punish and no suffering victims to care for. This kind of justice is described by the word tzedakah, which translates roughly to mean living justly or living rightly. Tzedakah is a fundamentally relational concept, focusing on broken relationships that need repair. Thus, in this worldview, the cause of any wrongdoing is due to a fundamentally broken relationship somewhere in the process. Perhaps the wrongdoer's relationship with their victim has recently soured. Or perhaps the wrongdoer's relationship with a father or a mother was a dysfunctional one, and that damage is then played out in later actions. It doesn't matter. Well, why would I talk about this? Well, the first reason is that I believe that as Christians, we're actually called to exercise both mishpat and tzedakah justice wherever we go. The command to live justly and give generously, to conduct ourselves with integrity and fairness, to comfort those who weep and lift up those who suffer, is simply inseparable from the command to live out the gospel. As Christians, we are called to be an advocate for those who are genuine victims within our society, and to live with just hearts and generous hands. But it goes deeper than this, and I think many of you may have suspected that I had a greater axe to grind than this. As I think I've expressed before in earlier episodes, it's quite clear to anyone from simply looking at the outside world that humanity is not in a good place. If God is so just, so good, and so perfect, then surely we must be included in his mishpat justice of the world. I mean, look at what we've done to the place. If God is a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, and a God who takes up the cause of the powerless, then we've got to come to terms with the uncomfortable fact that he probably hates a great portion of what we do. Broken relationships seem to be the new norm, with 1/3 of marriages ending in divorce in Australia, with refugees and civil wars around the world providing plenty of testimony to our failure to live with one another. Under the Christian worldview, this brokenness is ultimately a result of our fractured relationship with God. We know we have lived selfishly and our own way. In fact, God's words to the Israelites in Isaiah chapter 1 seem like they could be written to us. God says, "Your princes are rebels and companions of thieves." Here he's referring to the political leaders. "Everyone loves a bribe and runs after gifts. They do not bring justice to the fatherless, and the widow's cause does not come to them." It's worth not skipping over this point. I went into more detail about this during the first episode, but suffice to say that as humans, we know what is right, and we know enough to know that every single one of us chooses the less decent thing at least once every single day. Now, it's easy to ask whether we are really that bad at all, whether it's not doom and gloom to describe it in those kinds of terms. And these questions particularly come up when Christians are talking about the doctrine of hell and judgment, which are admittedly uncomfortable topics. And to those questions, I'll simply say this. If God is a truly good God, I mean, if he's really good, then he must hate evil in a way that we can scarcely comprehend. The more we empathize with an oppressed group of people, the angrier we get at the oppression. The more we identify with the fatherless, the more we desire to eradicate the circumstances that made it so. You simply cannot have a God that is good, but does not hate evil. In fact, I would even argue that a great deal of the world's ungoodness doesn't stem from the fact that we don't love good enough, but that we don't despise evil enough. Philosophically, our wrongdoing, which we justify to ourselves and try to wriggle our way out of our guilt for, must be absolutely disgusting to God, or else he wouldn't really be good. What can we do about this? It seems that he cannot bring the one form of justice without throwing aside the other. For him to exercise mishpat justice and to punish us for what we deserve for our wickedness carries an eternal sentence, and would thus doom any hope of a relationship with him. But to simply sweep everything under the rug and to forget it all ever happened might produce those good relationships with him, but we will simply continue in our ways and in how we are, and what's more, there will be no justice given to any victims of wrongdoing. And here is the tension within the Bible. God is a God not only of mishpat justice, but a God of tzedakah justice. By his goodness, he desires a right relationship with us, to live in harmony and in union with us, not because we're great, but because he is. In fact, if anything, you have to admit that we're actually the problem. We're like the child who doesn't deserve a doting parent. In Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18, it gives the following promise. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, it promises, Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. This is where the idea of grace comes in. And this is why that Jewish carpenter named Jesus is so central to the Christian message, worldview, and understanding of justice. Jesus is the person through whom these Old Testament promises are fulfilled and achieved. Simply speaking, Christians believe that in dying on the cross, Christ bore the penalty for mankind's sins and bore the just punishment for the sins of his people. Not only that, Christ volunteered to bear this penalty, like a soldier jumping on a hand grenade to save his fellow comrades, and his resurrection proved that the full penalty had been paid. With God's mishpat justice having been satisfied, the way is then open for his people to enter into a relationship with him. It's worth understanding that this Christian understanding of grace is both scandalous and, what's more, it's actually completely crazy. First, grace is scandalous because we see Christ stepping in to forgive people of their wrongdoing, even where he was not the immediate victim of the wrongdoing. It's very much like if I should shove you over on the bus and then a random stranger should declare me forgiven. I mean, shouldn't you be the one who gets to decide whether I'm forgiven for what I did to you? Yet it is not so in Christianity. In Christianity, through Jesus, everyone enjoys forgiveness. Therefore, grace evens the playing field between the man with a kind history and the man with a wicked history. Both have their past forgiven upon entering relationship with God. It's truly the great equalizer. Grace is crazy because it seems to defy any kinds of human social sense or logic. As humans, we seek relationships with one another for mutual benefit. We get into romantic relationships because, hopefully, both people provide one another with love, affirmation, and companionship. We have good relations with our co-workers to make our workplaces a more enjoyable place to be, and so that we can help each other. However, God mends our relationship with him out of no benefit to himself. As he is an infinite being who created the entire universe, what could we possibly offer him? What fulfillment, time, work, gift, love, or friendship could we offer? He created the entire universe, even gifting us with every breath that we breathe. Therefore, it is crazy that he would descend from God to man. Just imagine even temporarily transforming into a slug to get an idea of what this would feel like. But what's more, he went on to experience what it means to be human and then to suffer torture, mocking, and eventually death on a Roman cross. And for what? To mend his relationship with a muddy species of monkeys with opposable thumbs on a strange small blue planet hurtling through the corners of the infinite universe that he made. God has nothing to gain from a personal relationship with any of us, and in fact, he had an enormous amount to lose, but he seemed to count it worthwhile. Christ came and died that we might be free from the consequences of our sin, free to live in right relationship with God, free to seek comfort from him and to draw near to him. Because see, although God had nothing to gain from a relationship with us, he knew we had everything to gain. We were created to live in right relationship with him, and he has now created a way for us to return to that relationship and experience life to its fullest in the way we were designed to. This, in short, is the gospel. This is the hope of the Christian unto salvation. And ultimately, this gospel is all about God and Jesus, and not a bit about us. Not a bit about our efforts, about our good works, about what we can offer God, or about which rules we can follow. Thank you for listening to this episode of Kingdom Thinking. I release new episodes every week, so jump on the Kingdom Thinking Facebook page for notifications about episodes as they come out, as well as information about the episodes like transcripts. Until next time, have a great week and God bless.